My dear friend from Poland, who commented right before the break, is going to enjoy this title slide, because if the words of the previous speakers were problematic, then everything I put on this slide is entirely impossible. But there's a reason for that. You are looking at patent reform. Patent reform, in my estimation, is not going to happen addressing patent offices. It's not going to happen by addressing patent research. It's going to happen by making sure that people understand the economic consequence of their activities. And it turns out that patent offices, both by statute as well as by practice, have found themselves very isolated from the economic consequence of what they do. And so what I'm going to talk to you about is a bit of the actual economic cost-benefit analysis of intellectual property. For those of you not familiar with the terminology here, social contingent liabilities is a terminology that we have used quite extensively because, in fact, what you have, and the debate about the terminology of blocking patents is an interesting question. But at the end of the day, what you are doing is making a decision about whether society has received in benefit, which a patent is supposed to do, if society has received in benefit a disclosure for something for which a monopoly right is warranted. And the fact of the matter is, the social contract has long been abandoned. As I would say, every patent office on the planet is in breach of this social contract because it doesn't make the assessment of whether or not society has actually gained sufficient benefit for what has been granted in a monopoly right. Now, in point of fact, until we achieve the following state, we will not have parity within patent systems, and that is that the patent paradigm that is going to be required to move forward is to make patents legal tender. That means that for the economy that issues the patent, or in this particular case, the governmental organization that issues the patent, there has to be a financial liability for that issuance. Legal tender means that there's a sovereign right to grant a patent and there's a sovereign obligation to enforce it and defend it. Until that happens, we won't have patent quality, and until that happens, we will not have an economic consequence that we can deal with, and I will show that in not a theoretical argument, but an actual argument. And synthetic derivative options are actually where the patent reform agenda is actually finding itself at a very interesting confluence of the economic markets, and I'll spend a bit of time addressing that. But I'd like for a moment to take us back in history, and interestingly enough, the current debate about patents really is derived from an event that was triggered in the modern economy in 1980. It turned out that in 1980 it became evident that there was an economic transformation that was going on. And it was in fact in 1980 when the United States Congress and several governments in Europe as well as in Japan decided to incentivize the patent system to produce more patents. The first act, which is officially the start of the degradation of patent quality in the United States in a cataclysmic way, was the Stephenson-Weidler Technology Act of 1980. That act was actually passed by the United States Congress as a Cold War economic response to the growing number of patent applications coming from the country of Japan. And as a matter of fact, it encouraged people to actually abandon the notion of invention and actually suggested that the issuance of patents was in the economic interest of the country. That is when you see a huge disparity in actual process within the patent office as well as in the legislative and judicial processes within the United States, and they were mirrored shortly thereafter in Europe. Those were compounded by the Small Business Act of 1982, the Executive Order of April 1987, which actually is the primary executive order that actually has fostered the national policy in the United States, and it is mirrored in many of the language of the European Commission's enterprise policy in the Lisbon document of 2000. Now, it's important to ask a fundamental question with respect to, does R&D and patents have anything to do with each other? If you look at all of the federal and corporate R&D in the United States, and look at the top 5 industries into which all funds are poured, you know that the top 5 include computer electronic products, chemicals, computer-related services, aerospace, and automotive. Those are the top 5 industries that produce more than 75% of the total R&D expenditure, total, federal and corporate combined, United States. However, if you look at the top 20 patent issuing entities, and this is both USPTO, and the data is actually consistent if you look across all of the trilaterals, you notice a profound imbalance in terms of the representation of the top 5 industries in terms of the top 20, and if you go to the top 100, you find this disparity actually continues. Where despite the fact that chemicals and aerospace arguably have a significant contribution, in most estimates 22% of the gross expenditure in R&D, for some reason they do not have a commensurate amount of patents. So to suggest that there is a single, and Brian brought this issue up at the very beginning, a single unitary system that actually is even something to which we should aspire, is actually not only in error, but in fact is not in reality what is going on. We do not have a unitary incentive system, and we do not have a unitary patent system. And nothing could be more clear than the fact that chemicals and aerospace do not exist at all in any of the top 20 lists or top 100 lists in most of the world. So for those of you thinking that we have a unitary system right now, unfortunately the facts stand starkly in favor of arguing to the contrary. Now, if I could actually drive home that point just a bit further, I'd like to look at the upstream incentive questions with respect to innovation and the role that innovation and patents explicitly play in innovation. There has been this argued for many, many years by many quarters that somehow or another all patents are equal, our industries are equal, or so forth and so on. But if you look at the graphs that I have on the right-hand side of this screen, you'll actually notice specifically with respect to who is actually paying for and who is actually performing research. It's important to understand that while industry actually pays for about 65% of all R&D, and this is National Science Foundation data, industry pays for 64% of R&D. If you look over on the right-hand side graph, and if you look here at the actual who's funding basic research, which is the beginning discovery phase, you find out only 18% of all research is being funded by corporate enterprise. Now, this brings up a very interesting question. And the question is, do we have the same paradigm for patents that are in fact invention, in other words, the discovery of some new, novel, non-obvious, reduced-to-practice opportunity, versus those patents that are filed in the end stages of development and commercialization? I would submit to you that both the incentive at the beginning and the incentive at the end, and the requisite value of patents in both places are substantially different. However, in most applications of research, we actually suggest that research and development are in fact the same thing, and that patents and R&D and funding somehow are correlated, and the fact of the matter is that they're not. Now, I'd like to introduce a very interesting challenge that is addressing the financial markets, and that is that the majority of patents, and this goes to the question that was addressed before the break, the majority of patents actually do not have value accretion as their primary reason for being procured or being used. As a matter of fact, the majority of patents are actually used to slow the decrement of market loss. I would call your attention, for those of you who question that statistic, to open up the back of your cellular phone and take the battery off, and look at a phone 5 years ago, and then look at a phone this year. And count the number of patents inside of that phone, and then ask yourself, which phone did you pay more for? The fact of the matter is, we've had a log expansion of number of patents in a cell phone, but the cost of the cell phone has actually gone down. What is the incremental, then, value of a patent? And the fact of the matter is that the incremental value of a patent is to slow the deceleration of market erosion. It is not for value accretion. So anybody who wants to make the argument that somehow or another by getting a patent you're actually building value, unfortunately the statistics do not support that argument. And I hate to break it to all the SME lovers in the audience, but it doesn't hold true for SMEs either, and I'll show you that in a minute too, just to make us all very depressed. For those of you who want the beginning of the depression, here's the beginning of the depression. And I hope that at least I have enough of you in the room here who actually remember what log scales are to realize that this graph is in log scale. And the reason why it's in log scale is it cannot be visible